do you drink tea because you're British or you're from London
Yeah,
originally?
I'm obliged to. If I don't,
You lose your
struck off.
citizenship.
I lose my. I'm no longer a subject.
Right.
Yeah, interestingly, on an English passport, which always entertains me, I don't think it says you're a British citizen, but it also says you're a subject of Her Majesty, which always entertains me. That
Oh,
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 a subject.
I'm a subject. Yeah.
wow.
I don't
So
know.
she's
I can't tell if that's like a fancy thing or not great.
It's hard to know.
Yeah.
It's hard to know. Yeah, I need to delve into that and find out what my obligations really are. But
So
yeah.
how many tea a day do you drink?
Well, funnily enough, the English average I'd say is about 13 cups of tea a day.
No,
Are you
are
kidding?
you
My
serious?
No, I
No.
don't know. But my parents, like, it's unbelievable. They just chain drink tea. It's one cup to the next. I've seen my mum walking around the house holding a cup of tea in one hand and a beer in the other. I'm not even joking. It's just like the tea is like breathing.
That's too funny.
Actually, that sounds like a pretty good combination because I would think the hot tea would maybe clear the beer,
beer.
so it counteracts itself, right?
You should maybe try it. I'm not going to, but have at it.
You know what is good? Now we're getting really, off topic, but who cares? Is a shot of espresso, you let it cool down and you drop that into a Guinness. If anyone likes espresso and Guinness, it's pretty phenomenal.
Is it like a dirty Guinness or something?
I guess so, yeah.
It sounds like a kind of almost like an espresso martini, but a kind of
A poor
a very
man's...
large one.
yeah. A large and poor man's espresso martini.
A
Sure.
pint of espresso martini.
So look, thanks again for coming on the show. We're super excited. To kick it off, as we just talked about, you are originally from London. Can you talk about, where you're from and growing up there and whatnot?
I'm a Londoner, born and raised, North London, Crouch End, the Valley of 1,000 Indian restaurants is where I'm from. And I spent my whole life in London. I went to art school in London. I studied painting at Chelsea. And then after art school, I got a bit lost, wasn't sure what to do with myself. And I found a job working for an advertising photographer. And that was just great. It was really eye-opening. He was a very skilled guy. He did all sorts of different advertising work. And we did cars, we did products, we did fashion, we did everything. We did stuff in studio, we did stuff on location. He was very skilled at Photoshop and post-production. In fact, he had been working with Photoshop from like the beginning.
Wow.
So he had like the thing I remember the most is he had this like box of Photoshop version 2, and it was in black and white. It was only black and white. Can you imagine? And yeah, so that was kind of my real introduction into being a photographer.
So you grew up in London, but so you did go to school and you studied painting. Did you finish that degree at the, I'm reading my notes, the Chelsea College of Arts and Design?
That's right. Yeah. So I have a BA with honors, whatever that means. I still haven't figured out why I got that. I think it was for an essay I wrote. and yeah, I really enjoyed it actually. I still love painting. And I actually went back to school thinking that I needed to get that education. Once I decided after working for Doug that I wanted to get an education in photography. So I went to Goldsmiths and studied, did an MA, a master's in what was called image and communication, which was it was great. It was very open master's, and I did a lot of photography, but kind of quickly realized that my real education had come working for Doug, actually, being in the field. But that was a nice addition. And then that's where I met my wife, Michelle, who's from Sacramento.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. And then we lived together in London for a pretty short while before she told me that she couldn't handle London weather for a moment longer.
But I've never been to London, but it's like the top of our list of the places we're going to go to next. Is it like pretty dreary? Is that the reason why?
Londoners will tell you it's not, but that's because they've learned to deal with it. You know?
Okay.
There's a reason why the pub exists in England, and it is the antidote to London weather, and it's a great antidote. But that's why there's a pub on every other corner. I think, you know, we agreed to move out. I don't know whether I kind of agreed to whether we thought we would stay here, but I thought I'd come out for an adventure, and you know, just very open ended. And here I am, still here. I love it. So we moved to San Francisco. Now I live in Oakland.
Right. Really cool. Oakland, I was going to say, you know, San Francisco, depending on what microclimate you're in, is not really known for sunshine all the time, but Oakland's a bit different.
That's right. It lets me, my wife is pushing me to warmer climates. So we started off down by the Panhandle in San Francisco. It was a lot of fog. Yeah. So she's been working my English, you know, sensibility towards a warmer climate. She will never get me as far as like Sacramento. That's never going to happen. No. I think I've reached my limit.
So certainly not Los Angeles then, or like Santa Monica.
Yeah, it gets pretty foggy there, so I feel like maybe I could handle it.
Oh, okay.
I'll be all right. I love the fog. I need the fog. The fog resets me, and then it reminds me that I can handle it when it gets hot. But it has been getting hot here, as you can imagine. Yeah. Where are you guys? You in LA?
We fluctuate. We're between LA and San Francisco, so it kind of depends on the day of the week. But when we are in SF, we reside in the Sunset District, so Fogtown. 24/7, 365 Fogtown for sure. I think because I grew up in Southern California, I'm probably opposite. I like fog on occasion, but it's definitely not my reset button. I am curious though. So when you decided to go to college to study painting, when you were growing up and you were a kid, were you very interested in like designing, drawing, photography, these kinds of things? Because painting is a pretty specific thing to decide to study.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I was always, my parents were very much middle class Londoners, in that it's 24/7 arts lifestyle. So, you know, it's always going to exhibitions, going to concerts and opera and theater, and it's just, that's what, you know, they did. They're both doctors, actually, retired now, but they have a great love of the arts. So that was always surrounded by that, always brought up with that. In some ways, to my chagrin, I remember like being taken on a holiday to Russia when it was still the Soviet Union, when I was like 11, and we went to all these art galleries. And I just wanted to go to the beach. You know, I got home. I would get back to school and everyone was like, oh, we were on the beach in Spain. I was like, why can't we just go to a beach? So I feel like I appreciate the education that gave me in the arts, but yeah, I do really appreciate a beach now as well. So it's kind of it's worked both ways.
So you end up studying painting for a number of years.
I'm a bit curious.
Yeah, go ahead.
What kind of painting? Are we talking like modern, abstract type of painting, or like, you know, super detail kind of stuff?
I don't think I ever figured that out.
Okay.
Okay. That's why you're not a painter, I guess. I don't know.
That's why I'm not a painter. Yeah. No, I mean, I loved it. Chelsea was, you know, I was there kind of after the Britpop, the British explosion in art. It was after Damien Hirst and his contemporaries had really kind of had a scene, and so a lot of what everybody wanted to make and talk about was very conceptual, and that was really interesting in a way, but it didn't really fit with me. You know, the art and the paintings that I'd loved, like Vermeer and the like, and Hopper and people, it was very much about light and quality of light.
Yeah.
And when I was at art school, no one was interested in that. they didn't really care, you know, they wanted to know what the story was, what the concept was behind what you were doing. And that was fascinating, but it also closed off that area.
Right.
And so I think that when I came to do then photography, and then when I discovered architectural photography, I realized, oh, this is the language that I've been looking for.
Yeah.
You know, this is what I really enjoy. I love light and composition, and those are the things that I've discovered in it. So in a way, what I was looking for, I discovered in architectural photography when thinking I'd find it at painting school.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That's super interesting. Yeah, because the two painters you talked about are really very much about the light and the scene, and this is very much what photography is about, I feel like. So it's very interesting that you thought maybe you would find it in painting.
Indeed, and to the point where, you know, I don't know if you've seen David Hockney's documentary about Vermeer, but he kind of shows that, you know, Vermeer used the camera lucide, camera obscura, and camera lucide, I'm getting this mixed up, to basically paint with. And so he was working with a kind of primitive form of photography, is basically how he was painting. He wasn't looking directly at the subject and painting. He was looking at it through a lens projected onto something and copying that. Is a great documentary. You should see it.
Yeah, we should check it out.
So when you started interning or working with Doug, was his name? Was
Douglas Fisher, yeah.
Was that the first time that you had more seriously gotten into photography and, like, you know, shot stuff and worked in that kind of space? Or did you have an interest that was developing more strongly before that?
Well, part of the reason I went to ask him for a job, plead him for a job, and he was very nice about it, was because actually in my final year at art school, when we had to do our show, I discovered a darkroom in the painting department that nobody was using. And I started getting interested in photography, and I was taking pictures of black and whites and developing them myself, and kind of developing a love for that process, which, if anybody's done it, is a kind of magical experience the first few times you do it, especially. And so my kind of final year at Chelsea was a very odd mixture of painting and photography, as I just started kind of getting interested in that. So when I went to work for Doug, I'd already developed an interest in photography, but I really had no concept of what being a professional photographer would be. And so he introduced me to the joy and the extraordinary capability of digital photography. There weren't any digital backs when I was shooting for him. In fact, I think the last year I worked for him, Kodak had just brought out their very first digital back, and we went to see it. I think it was like 8 megapixels or something, and it seemed kind of fantastic, but also it wasn't enough, which is always fascinating to me, because Kodak never managed to get in on the action. Yeah, they did actually produce a digital back. But Doug was fantastic about taking, you know, he'd shoot on chrome, scan it in-house, and then and work on it digitally. And that was a great education for me.
It's interesting. A couple questions. What years are we talking about here? And also, what is, I think you said digital back or bag? Back, yeah. Back.
Kodak had produced, you know, like the Phase 1 backs that will fit on so Kodak had come up with a digital camera, but just the back, so it would go on a Hasselblad, I think. You know?
Okay. Like the body of the camera versus the lens.
Back at BACK.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the other question, which you don't want to answer, is like the timeline of this, because I'm always interested to hear, like, when, you know, especially with cameras moving digitally, like, when did different photographers come around, you know?
Timeline. I will find out. I have the worst memory for time. I have, like, it's
I think it's a good thing and a bad thing.
The worst. My wife's favorite story about me is me years ago. We were having a drink, and she seemed a bit down, and I was like, yeah, well, you know, I just can't believe turning 36 already. And she was like, you're not, you're turning 35. And I was like, oh, fantastic. I got a year out of nowhere.
Pretty good.
That's pretty good, yeah.
So you're in that time with Doug, and then you decide to go back to school. And I'm wondering what that education was like. Was it more technical information, conceptual? It was about composition?
Oh, what were you looking for going back to school?
I think what I was looking for was maybe just an affirmation that I could do this myself, and the feeling that I needed that education. Yeah. I quickly discovered that I'd actually learned technically all I needed to learn from Doug, and the majority of what I've learned about being a photographer, both in terms of the technique, post-production, and the business side of it. I learned a lot from Doug, and just the nature of the world that he inhabited. Going back to Goldsmiths College, was again very conceptual, but it was called Image and Communication because it was very open. They wanted you to kind of explore whatever you wanted to, and so I worked a lot with taking pictures and incorporating digital things into them in an odd way. So that's when we were just starting to use some 3D modeling programs and put things into that. So it was a nice opportunity to be creative again. It was only a year long. I don't think it was that informative to me, to be honest with you. I think it wasn't. The way I moved into architectural photography from there was to then I actually saw some Tadao Ando's work in a Wallpaper magazine, and that was an epiphany. I was like, oh, this is it. Because, I knew working for Doug, I wasn't really interested in. One thing I realized is whatever you're photographing, you need to love it. To spend that much kind of devotion and time to it, you need to really engage with your subject. It's not enough to be a good photographer. There has to be that connection. And I did not have that with cars.
Really?
It's got 4 wheels in the steering wheel. I'm happy. I did not have that with fashion. I did not have that with products. But although Doug never took a picture of a building, we did go on location, which I always really enjoyed. And once I'd seen some photography of Tadao Ando's, I realized, wow, this is all the things I love. The very same things that are very painterly, and then also this is a commercial work. So I immediately started trying to assist some architectural photographers, and at the same time meeting my wife and deciding to move to the States. We moved out to San Francisco, and I had a funny year where I wasn't allowed. I got what was called a fiance visa to come here, and this was shortly after 9/11, and my kind of application got lost in the craziness that was happening then. And so there was this strange year where I wasn't allowed to work. I wasn't allowed to leave the country unless I voided the visa.
Right.
While we were waiting for this application to go through. So I was forced to find something to do. So I spent a year just literally walking around San Francisco with a 4x5, incredibly heavy, bulky Horseman camera, and taking pictures of whatever architecture I could find and just kind of building a portfolio.
Wow.
And
that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's insane.
It's amazing to me. I think that you hand me a big 4x5 Horseman and in a Pelican case.
That's got to weigh how many pounds does that weigh?
It was so heavy. It was so heavy and there was so much stuff. And also what was so funny is that, everybody was in this heightened state of security.
Right.
So I had the very strange interactions with people. Like I'd be taking the picture of a federal building. Yeah. And I didn't know it was a federal building. I was just, well, this is pretty. I'll take a shot of this. I'd have crazy interactions with the public or even policemen.
Yeah.
People, what are you doing?
You're carrying around a 50-pound bomb.
Secretly working for Al Qaeda, taking shots and stuff like that. It wasn't the most inconspicuous way to take a picture of something. I tried to point that out.
So that's interesting because, one, it's kind of a bummer you weren't able to work. That's the challenge with coming into the States sometimes. But that's actually also, if you can afford it financially, a pretty remarkable opportunity to have that kind of freedom and meander. And San Francisco is a great place to be to shoot, for sure.
Yeah.
There's a lot to shoot.
I think at the time it was very stressful. We didn't have any money as a result. My wife was working to support us both. And she had, she's a school teacher now, but at the time she had a really crummy job working for a startup that was equivalent to Netflix. So they quickly lost the market, as you can imagine. But at the same time, I have a degree of nostalgia for it because, as you say, it was like a remarkable opportunity to just kind of develop my portfolio and develop my work. And then I took that portfolio that I developed and tried to kind of show it to people. And I was very fortunate. I showed it to Dwell magazine, who were based in San Francisco at the time.
Oh,
and they were really nice, just so great. And they gave me my first job, which was to go and shoot just a house. And they used to do this, like the very back page of Dwell used to be just like a shot of one thing, one house. So they sent me off on an assignment to shoot a house, and I was able then. So that's when I got my fiancé visa and I was able to work, and then I kind of grew from there, and working for architects and magazines in San Francisco.
So how did that first shoot of that first house you did go? Like, because I'm assuming you've never done that before this one happened, right? So
I had done a couple of shoots in London for architectural firms in London.
Okay.
So it wasn't my very first shoot, but I was fortunate enough to be sent with a woman who was working as part of the photo department, who is now a good friend of mine. Her name is Aya Brackett, and she's an absolutely wonderful photographer. She shoots food and places and people. And so that was extremely fortunate to me that I had Aya with me. She was just great. And I shot a stupid amount of 4x5 film. There's no way I made any profit. I'm quite sure I lost an awful lot of money because I was feeling so nervous about getting the exposure right that I just bracketed hell out of every shot I took and took a whole bunch. And so, I was able to come away with a good-looking chrome.
That's funny. So I'm also wondering, this is early 2000s, and certainly that's recent enough. So digital photography was pretty strong at that point. Why the choice to shoot film?
I mean, obviously, one of the things that's very important with architectural photography is to be able to use shift lenses, not so much tilt lenses, but shift lenses. I had really learned to practice using a traditional camera working for Doug, and I loved it. He always worked with an Arcus Swiss, a very beautiful Arcus Swiss camera, and would focus things immaculately and come away with an immaculate chrome. And then, once you've got that, then what you can do in Photoshop is to elevate that. A great believer that Photoshop can only elevate what you put in. You can't rely on it to really make you the image. You need to give it something great and it will take it up a notch. But that's all it can do. So I knew that workflow, and the cameras at the time were getting there, but they weren't really there. And even when I did get a digital back, I struggled so much with the color. My first digital back was a Phase 1 P25. And to this day, I've tried working on the files from it. And it's a very early chip. And for some reason, the colors the greens are just utterly bizarre. luminous greens that are inexplicably luminous, and it's very hard to massage those colors. I've tried very hard to get them to go somewhere sensible, but fortunately the chips have come a long way. And so, yeah, the move to digital was a great relief, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I would imagine.
I shot film for a long time. I moved from 4x5 to shooting medium format with a medium format Arca Swiss and digitizing that. But I used to have my own scanner. I had an Imacon scanner, and I would do the scanning. And it's such a process, as I'm sure you know, to do that. It's a lot of work.
Now you just go with an iPhone and that's it.
That's it. Yeah. iPhone 3.
iPhone 3.
Is that the secret to producing great photography? You use an iPhone 3. There it is.
So hard to come by now.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, that's true, probably. So you do that first shoot for Dwell. I had no idea that at one point they were based in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Aren't they on the East Coast now?
They're in New York now. The head office is in New York.
Yeah.
But they started in San Francisco. They were the owner lives in Marin, and they had an office there.
So when you moved to California from London, and you already had an interest in architecture photography, did you think that would be the place to go, or what was maybe New York ever on the picture? You know, I'm just thinking lots of buildings,
So actually, my wife went to NYU before she came to London. So we had a lot of friends in New York, and our initial plan was to move to New York. And that's an easy transition for a Londoner. Yeah. New York and London are very similar kind of beasts in a way. But we came out to San Francisco to meet her parents and spend some time here, and I just fell in love with it. I was really excited about it, and I then very tentatively brought it up with my wife, and I said, I kind of really like San Francisco's. Would you entertain the idea of moving there instead of New York? And she was like, oh my God, yes, I was only moving to New York for you. So that was great. I didn't think about it in terms of what it would mean in terms of my career and what architecture was available, to be honest with you. I just didn't think about that. It was more just I responded to the energy. Yeah. That's sounding very new age there, but you know what I mean? I just, went with my gut feeling that I really was really lovely what I felt about California. And then I've been very fortunate to be able to include clients working in LA. I love going to LA and working with people there. For still being in California, it's a very different city, as you know. And so the architecture there is just great. I think there's more opportunity to do more exciting architecture in LA in a way. But then I think also the constraints and that San Francisco and the Bay Area gives architects can also yield some very interesting work as well. So I love having the two to work at, being my primary kind of destinations.
A specific question. So, I mean, obviously you have to travel to go on site to photograph these different projects. Are you photographing mostly projects in California, or do you find yourself like 50-50 in California and the other half of the time outside the state or international, or I don't know, wherever?
Not international, to be honest with you. I've worked in Mexico. I've had trips internationally, but they've been for American architects. So if I've like gone to Turks and Caicos or somewhere, it's to shoot for an American architect. So all of my contacts and connections are here. Which I like. I'm very happy with that. There's, California in itself has got such an incredible diversity of landscape. If you're shooting in Napa or you're shooting up in Tahoe in the mountains or by the sea. I have a wonderful architect in Mexico who I shoot for a lot, Miguel Aragones. His work is just great. I'm very fortunate to have him as a client. And I've gone to Hawaii a fair amount. I've got a good friend in New York who I love to shoot for, but it would maybe be nice to shoot more internationally. But at the same time, we have 2 girls. I have a 8-year-old and a 6-year-old. So it's nice not to be away for too long for any given trip.
Yeah. International travel is brutal, especially now. So you do that first project for Dwell, and was it pretty much after that you continued on as your own business?
Yeah, I worked for them. I got a gig working for a magazine which is, I think, no longer exists, called 7x7 magazine. I don't know if you guys remember that, but that was
sounds familiar.
Popular magazine. Yeah, it was a popular magazine in San Francisco, and died with a death with the change in the print industry. They gave me this wonderful task of just going out and coming up with a double-page spread of someplace.
Oh, cool.
That was such a great gig for a photographer. You know, I'd get sent to a new winery, come up with a double-page spread, so I, just find shots that would work for that.
Yeah.
That was really fun. So that was a great way to be introduced to the architects in San Francisco that I was regularly in that magazine. And so then contacting people, cold contacting, didn't feel as cold. And then I was fortunate to work for some great architects. I got Jim Jennings is a San Francisco architect who gave me a kind of wonderful break shooting his house in Palm Springs. That was then in Architectural Digest. Trying to think back to some of my early kind of great shoots. That was a wonderful shoot. I did a lot of, completely skipping the big break for me was really shooting 2 Rizzoli books. I strangely got approached in the same year, basically to shoot 2 books. One was for a writer I'd done some shooting for Sunset magazine, and I met this editor there and writer called Daniel Gregory, and he was doing a book on Cliff May, who is a kind of old California architect. So I shot that book for him with Rizzoli, and then at the same time I was shooting for Lucia Howard and David Weingarten did a book called Ranch Houses. And that was a very kind of a very expansive concept of what a ranch house would be, from the very traditional up to the extremely modern. And in the process of shooting that, I shot the prefab that Marmor Radzina did in Palm Springs. And that led me to then start shooting for Marmor Radzina for a few years. I shot quite a lot of their stuff.
So for books like that,
so it went from there.
Are you basically commissioned to be the photographer for the entire book, or are you mixed in there with other? Really?
Wow,
that's crazy.
Yeah, and for those books, I was commissioned to be the photographer for the whole book because they wanted new photography to go with because there was only for Cliff May, there were very few people had photographed Cliff Mays now. And that was actually a wonderful thing to shoot. It's because Cliff May, like so many California architects, and in some ways was the real originator of the inside-outside living, which is inherent in a ranch house. But the idea that you would really, every kind of room has a connection to nature. Every room has a connection to the trees. Trees are a huge part in the Cliff May project. And so it was such a joy to go back and shoot these houses years later. And so the trees have developed, the landscaping is all developed. And so the project is realized in a way that it's simply, the person shooting it after they finished it, as much like I shoot projects now straight after they're finished. The project is realized, but it's not really because the landscape hasn't been realized yet. So to go back and shoot those things now made a lot of sense. It was very interesting, made a lot of sense for the book. I think that books, along with magazines, are obviously working with less budget now. So the opportunity to commission a photographer to do the photography for a whole book is rarer. But I think also having a single photographer for a book really aids the quality of a book. To have, no matter how good the quality of the pictures that individual photographers may bring to a book project. If it's a disparate group of photographers, the book ends up looking a little bit jumbled, I think.
Right.
You know, as often it does with architectural books. You've got all these different competing styles of photography in it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's odd in a way.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point. I've never thought about it that much, but it is true when you pick up a lot of architecture books, it's a bit jumbly. It's a little bit chaotic. You really don't know. You almost don't know as an architect looking at it, right? You almost don't know how to understand the works in relationship to each other because all the photographic styles are so different at times that you don't.
That's right.
And then also some photography is hyper distorted and whatnot, so you don't really know what the truth is, and it becomes a little bit confusing, I guess.
I mean, you find yourself, what you're judging subliminally is the difference between photographers as it is as much the difference between architects. It's very hard to separate those things.
Yeah.
You know, your assessment of your experience of a space through photography is so very much about what the photographers, the way they've shot it. Yeah. Unfairly so. Very unfairly, but it is. Yeah.
No, I think it's true. And I had mentioned this on the podcast, I think a number of episodes ago. I recall, I think when I was in undergrad school, I was talking to an architecture colleague of a fellow student of mine. And I think he had posed this silly question of which is more important, the architect or the architectural photographer in terms of like what architecture means to the general public. And it's an impossible question. It's more like a think question than it is there's a finite answer. And he was adamant that the architect is more important. And I think more for just fun, I was adamant that that's not the case. I mean, in that the power of photography, but it highlights an interesting point, which is for a lot of people, they don't see a piece of architecture in person. Right. A lot of people, even like Falling Water, for example, who gets a lot of visitors, most people in the world have not seen that building in person. They only see it through basically one or two photographs, and that's their experience of the architecture. Yeah. And that's a pretty phenomenal thing to realize when we're talking about architectural photography, I think. I think you're absolutely right. Without any hesitation, of course. The architect is more important. I mean, there's nothing for me to shoot without an architect, and the building definitely exists without me being there. But it is a kind of, it's slightly it's an odd relationship between photography and architecture for that very reason, especially with residential work, because a lot of, an art gallery can be seen by lots of people. A residence, maybe there'll be one photo shoot of that residence, and that's it. I often wonder whether that's a good or a bad thing for architecture. I feel like it's a complex thing. Because it's definitely the case. I think it's a bit like people that projects can be photogenic or not. And it's not necessarily a reflection of their beauty, just the same it is with people. Or the experience of the project can lend itself to some great photos, but actually inhabiting it and being there, maybe there's a mismatch there. There often is, I think. I've had some projects which are a real struggle to photograph, but are just wonderful projects. And other projects which are just create easy, wonderful, iconic shots. Not iconic, but classic, Instagrammable shots. But I wouldn't necessarily say that reflects. I mean, they're great work, but it's not necessarily. Creating a level playing field in that regard. And I wonder how that's affected, how architects operate, because they're obviously being influenced by what they see. But again, what they see is 80% through photographs. Sometimes when I have friends, I have often people who are not in our field will say to me, "Oh, you can be an architectural photographer." Like,
people pay you to do that? Well, it's very confusing to the man on the street. People, you're a photographer. Oh, what did you shoot? I shoot architecture and buildings. And they're like, oh, there's this pause.
Who pays you to do that?
Poor guy. Okay. Like real estate.
Drone shots. That's what you do, drone shots.
Like, I guess you weren't very good at it then. But then, if I do enter into a conversation, I'll say, name your top 10 buildings in the world.
Yeah.
And I'll say, okay, and how many of those have you visited? Maybe 2 out of the 10. Well, then your experience is entirely dependent on photography. That's it.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff there. One of the questions I had kind of queued up, which I think you just answered, was, is it, if a building is good, is it easier to shoot? And if a building is bad, can you make it look good? Kind of thing. And I think you sort of answered it. You brought up another dimension to that topic, which is, a still photograph is kind of one thing, but then as you talked about moving through the space and feeling it, using the feeling word, sometimes it feels different from what you might think in a still photograph. And I think it's, you asked the question like how some of this affects architects. I think it's an interesting one, because I do think there are a certain population of architects who are, and I think this applies to a lot of industries because of basically social media and everyone sharing images, that some designers and creatives are too driven and too guided by that final product of producing one cool image, because they know that's what's going to get shared, get liked, raise awareness, bring value and whatnot. And they kind of aim toward that rather than in the case of architecture, what it's like for the people who are actually in the building.
I mean, I imagine that starts way before any consideration of photography, because renderings are so powerful now.
Yeah,
that then
that's
you
true.
are, what you're trying to sell to a client, how you're going to, what you're producing. Inevitably, you need to produce that excitement and that wow. And so, again, you're creating a flat 2-dimensional image. I think that's what maybe got architects very excited about the idea of using VR to present projects to clients, is that you finally get away from that being tied down to that rendering and give people a different way to experience what you're trying to create. But yeah, I think it's quite a challenge, I imagine, for architects to have to live with that. They have to work thinking about things in the manner that they do, and the ability that they have to think about spaces and materials, but then have to, at the end of the day, relate that to a client and present something which is going to get them excited. And that it's got to be difficult.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. That's like 50% of our lives sometimes.
and we often think about like the older times when architects didn't have computers, and people just kind of had to trust them to see like what how it's gonna turn out. And now we're kind of losing a little bit of that exciting mystery throughout the process. Is people already know in a way like how it's gonna look like before it's done, and we lose a little bit of magic. But it's challenging.
Though I guess, Frank Lloyd Wright was one incredible draftsman, and he knew that he had to get he had it in his head. I mean, he probably could have gone out and just,
done the thing,
done it. But he had to get that across. And so he learned that he needed to translate that. I don't imagine he needed a drawing for himself. He needed the drawing for other people to meet him halfway. Yeah. Is my guess.
Yeah, because he was 1 in a million. That guy was a maniac. I mean, I'm
still puzzled by this guy. It was so in advance, on his time with what he was doing, that I think he probably was an alien. Honestly,
I feel that way every time the Marin Civic Center, I drive past it so frequently, and you get this glimpse of it from the freeway, and every time I see it, I think precisely that. Honestly, I think was this guy an alien that just brought this? Because it looks unworldly.
It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't look human. It's so separated and it's so elevated. It's so challenging to us even now, what he's offering. And, extraordinary. Yeah, extraordinary. And wonderful. So inspiring, right? It can have that effect. It doesn't get boring. It has that effect to this day.
Yeah, that's the part that's crazy. And I was, we were looking up, like he was born, I forget what year he was born. It was like 18 something. Like a long time ago. Wild. I wanted to talk, do you have a question?
No, go ahead.
Oh, I want to talk generally about your process and how you shoot and how you produce a good photograph, because there are certainly a lot of architectural photographers. There's some that are really well known, and there's different kind of categories or styles of architecture photography. And I do have to say, and I think I speak for the both of us, that when we see your work, when we're online looking at images, if there's an image that stands out to us, not just because of the architecture, but because of the photograph and the composition, like 90% of the time, it's your photograph.
Oh, wow.
No, seriously.
It's kind of weird. It's like, who took that photo? Oh, Joe Fletcher. Yeah. Oh, Joe Fletcher again. I'm like, this guy is everywhere.
That's really kind. Thank you.
And I don't know how to put into words what it is that I'm seeing when I see one of your photographs that makes me feel that way. But there's another, there's like levels to the game, right? And I feel like your photographs are on a different level than a lot of others, even if the architecture is the same, even if the elements in the photograph are the same, and you have nice lighting, you have a tree or whatever. But for some reason, your things are just a notch above. And I was wondering if you could kind of, just talk about your process and if you have a sense of why and how your work gets to that level that I'm perceiving.
Well, I'm extremely flattered. That's extremely kind of you. I was kind of worried you might ask me this
because it's this natural talent.
My answer is always rather dull on this one, in the sense that, I mean, my process, I'll tell you, my process is simply I like to shoot natural light. Very occasionally I'll introduce a modifier, but it will be like a reflector or something, very rarely. What I've discovered is that I just need to be present and let the picture find you. There's a saying which I think is great, which is that you don't take a great picture takes you. I really believe in that statement, in the sense that it's a matter of being present, and then you just see it and you're like, oh yeah, that's it. Just be there and see it. And be about being present. The photo, sometimes you have to fight to make a photo work, and you need to cover this, whatever it may be. And those are a challenge. Every single time a photo works for me, it's been the easiest one to take that day.
Really?
And I think it's just because it's there, it presents itself. And photography itself is actually pretty easy. The technique is not that complicated, especially with digital cameras. So having a camera that you just effortlessly use, and just keeping your energy levels up, having plenty of coffee and being there, or tea, and being available. That's kind of it for me. Obviously, I try to be at a project pretty much from dawn till dusk. I try to have some idea of where the sun is going and think about what it's going to do, where it's likely to hit, so that you're not just constantly spinning around the building. But at the same time, things will happen that you can't predict, you can't know. No one can know, not even for that. The architect may have been there a week ago and the sun has changed just enough to give something different that day. The weather is so different. So I think that the trick for me as such is to always remind myself things will happen, just be present.
That's great.
And I think also that way, I like to think that I'm not putting too much of myself into it. I'm not trying to manufacture something, a condition, a composition. And then, as you would in a studio or on a more commercial shoot, when you can modify stuff. And in that way, it's a kind of a more direct translation of that moment, of that space. Not necessarily reality, that might be pushing it, but a good translation of the experience of being there then.
That's interesting.
I think that's actually a very good way to describe maybe what we can perceive in your pictures. It feels very much like it's not something that's been, over fabricated, produced, curated, like manufactured, like you said yourself. It feels very natural and very honest in a way, which makes sense. If that's the way you approach it, I think it really, transcribe like that in the photos.
That's lovely to hear. I mean, it's very odd to think of honesty in terms of taking a humongous building and putting it onto something flat, which is tiny. I mean, how it works at all is a mystery in a way, because our experience of seeing something is so bizarrely different to what actually the medium of photography is. But then the joy of photography is that it can elicit something which does feel when it works, it does feel very connected to reality and the subtleties of light and the time of day, the quality of the weather, the temperature. All those things can be imbued. I often think of it like a haiku, like you can fit, if a photograph tells you, if you feel like what time of year it was and what time of day it was, that's a wonderful thing, I think. Then you're really getting closer to that experience of that moment, which is such a wonderful thing to share and a wonderful thing to feel when you see a photograph and you feel it. And like you say, to that end, more and more I try to do less and less to a photograph. I think when I started and you are not as confident, the ability to do things in Photoshop, there's so unending amount of things that you can do. I used to spend a lot more time doing stuff to images and trying to manipulate them, get it right, and feel like I had to do something. Now, I don't think I spend any less time, unfortunately, but it's more to just maybe doing a lot less, but just really trying to get those things that I'm doing really, really right.
Which I feel like it's like design, it's maybe easier to just put a lot of fluff on a building, right? But like trying to keep it as minimal and simple as possible is actually a very complex exercise.
Absolutely, and actually it's a lot more work. It's always like in all design, it's the real work is in the stuff nobody recognizes, nobody sees. If you've managed to make something meet perfectly, no one's going to know how complicated
the hours and weeks it took to get that to be aligned.
No. It's funny the amount of times an architect will ask me to shoot something so mundane, and I'm thinking, and then you discover it's because there was so much work into making this happen. And it's it's a great disappointment to have to point out, like, but no one can't see it.
The next level of architecture photography would be like X-ray architecture photography, because really like people don't actually see like all the stuff that's actually hidden behind the walls and make architecture what is architecture really. Hiding all of that stuff.
It'd be helpful if you were buying a house to see what the heck's inside of the house.
Well, that would be helpful too.
The point that your photography and photography in general like wants to be related to reality, but also not be just a raw not even translation, but a raw copying of what is there is interesting, because it also makes me kind of think that, you were mentioning if you look at a photograph and you can tell from that the mood of the photograph and the seasons in which it took place and some of the details of the story behind it. And it's also that, I think an image of a building has the potential to kind of also allude to a greater dream reality that doesn't really exist, which is part of its beauty. And at least for me, I don't know how other people work, but when I see an image that's well done and it gets burned into my mind, that almost becomes a very powerful conscious experience of the building I have, even if I've seen the building in real life, and even if I go to that building every day, that image is still kind of like the dream state that I'm wanting to be a part of, or that I think I'm experiencing. I don't know if that makes sense. You know, same thing if I feel like if you see a so-and-so wearing a hoodie and then I wear the hoodie, I feel like I'm part of this other state. I feel like the same thing happens with building photography, architecture photography, where it's alluding to this greater, better future state that maybe, I don't know, I'm hoping to be a part of, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like the risk, you know, the word that I like is, you know, I hesitate to introduce because is poetry, you know?
Yeah.
You know, the poetry of a moment, the poetry of architecture, I think is the elusive thing. And when you've been, great architecture is poetic. I think that's the difference between great architecture and mundane architecture, is that, and that can be many things. It can be many things, but you feel it when you experience it. And I think maybe the poetry in itself is the distillation of something into few words rather than more, or concise use of words. And photography can do that. It can distill down an experience of something. So maybe that's what sticks with you, is this kind of this distillation in a way. And in that way, it does become slightly unreal, slightly unworldly because of that. I think going back to Edward Hopper, you know, he was always his. There's not much resolution in his paintings. You know, no, not clumsy, but there's not a lot. The actual detail isn't there, but the distillation of the moment and the experience of light is so heightened that they have a kind of unworldly quality to them as well.
Yeah. So it's not necessary for you to go and scout a place before you go shoot, right?
It's not. I mean, it's actually nice. I like it, not because I think it's necessary, but, you know, a shoot day is kind of intense in concentration. And so for me, I love the opportunity to scout a place if it's possible, just to be able to walk around with an architect and have that lovely experience of chatting to them and not having the intensity of it, of a shoot day. I don't know how much I think probably helps subliminally to start to get to know a place. And it's nice to, especially if it's like a large property, to wander around and get to know it. Before is very useful. I try not to get too tied to something on a scout day. And I don't like to take scouting shots because I've discovered that takes you away from being present on the day, because you're looking back, you know, oh, this isn't happening. I thought that was going to happen. And you're tying yourself to a previous moment rather than be present in the one there, which I think is, like I say, I think is the important part.
How big is your crew? Is it just you running around, or do you have like a team of helper and why not?
Right.
It's often me. I have an assistant that I'll bring but I'm happy, if there's, I've discovered also that I prefer to have less people on a shoot. The idea of being present and being able to see stuff, part of that is not having people in the way. And, you can have style, I've been on magazine shoots where you have, don't get me wrong, good stylists are absolutely wonderful on a shoot when you can have them, or when it's applicable. But if you start having stylists and, different team members and different magazine people coming in and out, different stuff, it's too much, and the ability to just say, oh, actually, sorry, I don't want to shoot here. I want to shoot there. The light's great there. So the ideal situation for me when I speak to clients is to say, can you get everything ready the day before as best you can? And then we'll have this kind of freedom of movement on the shoot day. So if, often it's just me, an assistant, and a client, or me and a client, and maybe one of the interns or somebody to help shuffle furniture around or that kind of thing. But the quieter the day is with people, the easier I think it is to take pictures.
I could kind of imagine that. I was going to wonder, is it like a terrible situation if you had the architect there, like looking over your shoulder, being like, "What are you doing?" What?
Actually, I actually quite like that interaction.
Right.
I'm not. Yeah. That could be really, great creative collaboration. I think one of the things I love about my profession is that, and I have is extremely lucky in the sense that my interactions are with other creatives. It's the poor client that has to have, has to work with non-creatives. So I actually, a lot of my shoots, the client, an architect will be with me, or the designer will be with me, and I like that.
Really? On the day of the shoot?
Oh yeah, very frequently.
Cool. Interesting.
Yeah, it doesn't have to. I'm equally happy if no one's there.
Yeah.
But it's nice. It can be a really fruitful interaction, actually. Just spark things, get people thinking about stuff, and architects will notice something I won't and remind me. And that's great. It's also nice to know that you're headed in the right direction. With what you're doing, and you're not missing something that they're thinking about. So, yeah.
That strikes me as. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
That strikes me as being one of the biggest differences, I think, between like what you do versus maybe what we do is, I think in general, the concept or the idea of trying to be present in the work is applicable to what we do. And it's tough to do sometimes, I think in particular because of, this sounds dumb, but the phone pinging, the email, like there's things distracting you. Just trying to be present and clear and honest with the work is sometimes a challenge. But the difference I was going to talk about is that the idea of doing a shoot that's one day and, you're trying to be present in that day, and what you capture is what you capture. And that's part of the beauty of getting it right. It makes me very nervous because obviously for us, it's the opposite. Like all of our work is in preparation for construction. And then obviously we do work during construction, but it's all preparation, pre-visualization, pre-everything.
We don't do improvisation.
There's no,
so much.
There's no, let's see what happens the day of. Like that's like actually, now that I think about it, almost the total opposite of what we have to do in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah. I know because I feel that from every client. They're like, what's next? And I'm like, I don't know. And they're like, but I think that often a shoot day can be a really cathartic exercise for an architect. Actually.
Yeah.
I think that brings me great pleasure at the end of the day when a client's like, that was great. I haven't even seen the images, but I think just the process was also the opportunity to really spend the day on a project. Architects don't often get that opportunity. You think about this thing, you build this thing over years, but to actually be forced as such to spend a day where you're looking at it, not doing anything, just looking at it for the day, or maybe 2 days. I love to shoot over 2 days when it's possible. Something about sleeping on after it's amazing how you sleep on a project. The next day, it's just some of the photography becomes effortless. It's there. Things happen when you sleep. But that's obviously a budget constraint. 2 days is a luxury for shoots. But yeah, I completely agree with you. The difference between architect's mindset and mine is really interesting.
I was wondering, this is more of a career kind of question, but now you're pretty well established, very well established. Looking back, was there sort of a turning point for you when you started to become sought after, as I imagine you are now, where your clients, architects and designers, became less hands-on, and after they saw your portfolio, they said, "You know what? We trust you. Just go shoot the thing, make it look good, we trust you versus the beginning.
Yeah,
I don't know, speculating.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, I don't think there's any point. I think it's, it's just a grind.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people, you get older and you get more established. I've had a lot of practice now. So I think my work's getting better. I hope it is as well. But there is a big thing to kind of having a certain amount published and having things done that allows an architect to be confident in you and relax a little bit. It's a lot, you work on a project for maybe 8 years, some projects I've photographed. And especially residential, the clients might say, yeah, you can come on this day, and then I don't really want you to come back.
Yeah.
Well, that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of my career is me learning to manage that pressure. Is, getting better at the photography and learning photography, that's one thing. But actually learning to manage the pressure of what it means to be there, and then having this idea that the best, or knowledge that the best photographs you're going to take are when you're present and when you're relaxed. That's a difficult combination, right? It often feels like you have to kind of, it's a bit like being a sportsman, I guess. You have to kind of be in the zone, and so the pressure of that game, you kind of have to manage a way of putting that aside. So I think that as I've progressed in my career, the fact that my clients, also some of my clients I've had for a long time. So a lot of the time, if I'm shooting for the first time with an architect, there can often be some anxiety about the process or, what's going to happen, because they haven't worked with me before. And so they're entirely sure. Whereas the clients I've had for years, they can relax, that they can feel confident in me. But I think having got a larger body of work, having more stuff published, and being older makes for everything's much less stressful.
Yeah,
and so easier going in that way. Yeah.
Most of your work is in the single-family residential type of project. I think you've shot the Amangiri Resort Hotel, which is slightly of a different category. Is that?
What was that? Repeat that again. What project was that?
Amangiri, the big resort hotel.
Oh, okay.
That you've seen everywhere before. It's absolutely beautiful. Was that by choice? So you kind of ended up in the single family, architecture photography. Is that something that interests you more than maybe other typologies of architecture?
It's a bit of both, I think, in the sense that it's kind of a choice, and then also kind of where my path has just taken me. Part of that may be living in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
I remember taking my architecture portfolio to different architects in San Francisco, when I was starting, and I'd present these pictures. I had like these big buildings that I'd taken, you don't have access to residential work when you're just wandering around taking pictures. And they were like, these are lovely, but we do residential work. So, so I was like, gosh, I really got to get some residential work. And I really did. I got lots. And then I found myself, and it's the same for architects. You do one thing and suddenly everyone's like, oh, well, they couldn't possibly make a restaurant. They've only got houses, and you're like, well, of course I could, I did shoot I got to shoot the De Young Museum when that opened, and that was great. I think, to my surprise, I really like shooting residential work. I particularly love shooting things in nature. I love that combination. I love seeing the man-made in nature. I love that interaction. I love the way they interact with each other. So a lot of residential work lends itself to that. So that makes me happy. And the reality is that large commercial work, great buildings that are large are rare. actually. They don't come up that often, ones that are that exciting architecturally, if you're not thinking on a worldwide scale.
Yeah.
So, but residential work, people get to sneak in all kinds of interesting ideas and try things out. So there can be a lot of creativity available in residential work. So I didn't intend to just do residential stuff, or primarily, but I've been taken in that direction. And I can't say I fought it. I do enjoy it.
Yeah.
But I always love to shoot an art gallery or something, or a church or whatever it may be.
Something
I really
different.
enjoy shooting those. Yeah, I love it. Yeah.
Is there a particular type of project that you would not take on? Like, I don't know if that would be, I guess initially I was thinking like modern or contemporary style of architecture versus, heavy traditional or classical or whatever other categories.
I think the style that I do think that it's important to be honest with yourself and your client about whether you get whether you have, going back to the idea that if you're going to shoot something, you've got to have a relationship to it. You've got to respond to it. You've got to be excited about it. If you can't find that, then I think you're doing yourself and your client a disservice. And I've learned to be honest with my clients about, people who have approached me about that. It's difficult because you're not trying to, make a judgment.
Right.
It's just that I can't make the connection I want to be able to shoot this the way I should. So I struggle with things which are not so much traditional, but faux traditional.
Okay.
It might be the European roots. I
think
struggle
so.
with
Maybe
that.
it's some terrible kind of European snobbery or something. But I think I find it really difficult to get to make a connection with that. If something is old, it can be beautiful, right? A really old thing, it can be beautiful. So it's not so much the actual style that I feel I can respond to, but if somebody's made a Spanish Tuscan villa, out of modern materials, I find it really difficult to respond to that.
I get the same thing with
really
architecture.
it's really hard to talk about this without sounding really snobbish, isn't it? So,
no, but I totally agree. I have a pet peeve, the French Mediterranean,
French chateau style.
Southern villa style that people do in LA, and I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, it doesn't look anything like the real thing,
No, and it ends up feeling like Disneyland. It ends up being, and for that reason, it ends up feeling dishonest, is the way I feel about it. There's also the fact that I feel like there's a deep sense of something which is pessimistic. Because what you're saying is that the present has nothing to offer. That's the subliminal message that I get from somebody saying, if somebody's going to, take an old building and update it and try to stay true to it, that's different.
Sure.
If you're starting from scratch and saying, okay, these are the things available to me. Yeah, I'm going to go with the 1930s Spanish villa, in LA. Then what are you actually saying? You're saying the present day, the modern, the future has nothing to offer me. I'm not interested in it. I don't like it. Maybe that's me being really unfair. Maybe it's fine to have a joy in something old. I'm probably being really unfair in that way, but I also feel like there's a subliminal message to me, which is just kind of a lack of optimism.
That's really fascinating.
I think that's a good
I've
point.
never thought of it exactly that way, but I can certainly see what you're saying. I think for me, and obviously speaking more as an architect, the part that bothers me is that I suppose it kind of depends on where the client or the homeowner, let's say, where they're coming from. If it's like a sincere interest in this particular style and they've studied it or whatever, maybe that is more acceptable. But I feel like in a lot of cases, the issue I have is that people want these things not because they actually like it or they understand it. It's more because someone else has it and they kind of like it. And it's a very quick decision. Oh, I kind of like that. Okay, let's do that. And of course, as an architect, it's like, there's a really deep history to what was done and a deep potential history to what's happening now. And architecture as a form of art, like it deserves to be thought about a little bit more than, I'm going to copy that because I like it. I saw it on Instagram. It looks good kind of deal. And also deserves to be thought out because, it's the framework for your house and where you're living. Like we should be a little more thoughtful about it.
Yeah. I mean, I imagine a kind of anthropologist, psychologist could look at the state of mind of, different of society at different points, and you could make an assessment of optimism and how people felt about their country and their future based on how accepting and open they were to contemporary architecture of the time. Yeah. I bet you those things are directly linked. In some way. People don't know. It astounds me, living in the Bay Area, how frequently you'll see tech people with lots of money available to them to commission something. This isn't always the case. Some of the best things I've seen have been commissioned by tech people, but frequently people who are working in this industry where they're, disrupting and thinking about things all anew, and yet what they decide to have as a house is almost non-architecture. It's not even it has a style. It is just none. Everything is just the most generic concept possible, and that it's very odd to me, dispiriting, sad a little bit. It's sad. It's sad if you go, when people talk about it, it's sad if somebody sees the Neutra house in Palm Springs and you hear people say, "Oh, that kind of contemporary architecture isn't for me." And you think,
you're like, are you out of your mind?
This is okay. Maybe it's not for you, but please don't call it contemporary architecture. Surely we've digested this by now.
Yeah,
totally.
The gap between some of the folks in the tech industry and the other thing you just described is something that we see firsthand and we've heard about, and it's a conundrum. It's perplexing. I don't understand it. At some point, I'll have to have like a long discussion with a body of successful young tech people and say like, what's happening with why is this the case with this population of people?
What's going on?
Let's problem solve this here because it's confusing.
I mean, I've thought about what I think is the same, their choice of clothes. Like Einstein wanted to wear, apparently, I don't know if this is just a myth, but he chose one suit and tie, and he wore the same thing every day because he didn't want to have to think about it. And so I suspect that that's the case. They spend so much time in the virtual world, in whatever way it may be, thinking about it, that the world that they actually inhabit is just kind of annoying. They just want it to be the simple response. But having said that, I've seen, I've photographed some tech homes there where they really have brought an amazing kind of vitality and optimism and excitement to the architect, and the architect has responded, so.
No, for sure.
It's not a rule.
No, absolutely not. So jumping a bit back then to process. So the shoot 1 or 2 days, depending on obviously budget and I guess scale of for like a really sizable home, like a 13,000, 20,000 square foot home. Will you tell the client like, this is pretty big. If you're trying to capture X number of photographs, this is going to take 2 days? Like, is there a reason why you would go to 2 days other than, there's the budget for it, I guess?
Well, it depends, there's lots of factors really. It depends on, sometimes there are a lot of cooks, and so that makes the shot list tricky. There's interior designers, architects, contractors, lots of people want different things from the shoot. And so to accommodate all those things, then I'll say, well, you're going to be splitting the costs because to squeeze all that into one day can be can be difficult, and then the architect, I've made the mistake of trying to accommodate everybody and never really accommodating anybody.
Right.
And so I never like to do that. I just have a primary client and I'm really working to get it right for them. And then, but if there's a huge list of stuff, or if the property is much bigger, or if the architect themselves has a big list, but then there's also, if it's a really important project, and it's a great project, then the ability to give yourself that extra day, so that you've got an abundance of riches when it comes to the number of shots you're then going to choose your set from. The chances of really hitting a strong set, you just increased it a lot. I think after that, you can't do that indefinitely. You can shoot the same project for a week and keep getting better and better stuff. It's just, I think 2 days is a great amount of time if it's possible. But that 1 day for many projects works great too.
I also actually want to call back. You said that maybe this process is cathartic for the architects or the designers, and I would second that. That's like definitely the case, because as much it's interesting thing for architects, you're primarily concerned with the architecture itself, obviously, and how it gets used, how it's enjoyed, how it performs, and whatever. But in terms of being able to document and have the project kind of live on a life beyond, again, the local, like that's it. No one's going to look at your CDs. No one cares about the details you did. It's really like for me at least, I feel like when something is photographed, like, oh, okay, it's like officially done now.
It's the final
it's been captured. It's like, even if something, the client burns it down or they damage it or whatever, it's there. It's going to live on. I feel a sigh of relief.
It's part of the rewards,
Yeah, it is.
I mean,
it is.
it's the nice conclusion to a long process.
Yeah, I can't. Yeah, apparently, I don't know if it's. Apparently, Mies van der Rohe said, "Shoot it and forget about it." It's a way of closure. It allows you to move on to the next project. It allows you to document something, and for the many reasons you listed, like, that allows you some closure, that at least whatever happens to it now, I can be happy with where I took it, and what I did with it. I can't tell you the number of times I'll get a call or an email from the client the day after the shoot, and they are so exhausted. And I don't think it's not because, I hope it's not because I've exhausted them, which may be possible, but I think it's just that it is that, release of being able to take that was the final step. That's so often what people say, like, that's it. And you can let it go. And it's this wonderful closure to move on to the next project. And those pictures and that moment can never be taken away.
Yeah.
So you shoot the thing and you're on site, and then you dip the architect and your client into a bath of water, and they come out refreshed.
That's right. Bath of champagne.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, that would be a cool tradition at the end of each shoot, a bath of champagne.
Yeah, it might blow my budget, but it would be.
You need some sponsors in the champagne category. I was wondering who actually most often hire you. Is it the architect who kind of needs the picture for their website, their portfolio? Is it the clients of the house who wants to have pictures of their home? I kind of doubt that happens a lot.
That's very rare. That was the shoot I did this week, interestingly. But that's very rare to have the homeowner directly contact me. In this case, the homeowner was a designer, and he was really excited to get the shoot and as a present for the architect.
Oh, that's
nice. I thought was just really lovely. By far and away, the majority of my clients will be architects, and then I'd say second on the list is interior designers, and then third would be magazines, newspapers. The other kind of group would be shooting I do some hotel work and things like for the Aman group. I shot the Amangiris, and their new Camp Sarika, which is the tents. But by far and away, the majority of my clients are architects. Yeah, of all different sizes, but yeah.
Is there a particular project that is more memorable than others out of all of the ones you shot so far?
Gosh. That's a hard question to answer. I've had so many wonderful moments. I think the experience of shooting in the desert for me is always a magical experience.
Mm-hmm.
I've had some wonderful times doing that. I've loved shooting for Rick Joy. I think his architecture is really interesting, and the people that I've worked with on shoots there, just great people. And Matt Luck is an architect who started his own firm now, and I'm very excited to see what he's going to be creating. But Rick Joy's architecture is just completely wonderful. So the Amangiri would be part of that. He did that with Marwan Al Sayed and Wendell Burnett, and that I think the first time I went to Amangiri was a pretty special experience. I don't think I've seen another building in real life that is quite the same, quite so interesting and stunning and beautiful. I think a lot of Rick Joy's work is wonderful. I love shooting for Anne Fougeron here in San Francisco. Wonderful work. I've got wonderful clients in Woods and Dangaron down in LA. I shot recently a shoot for them in Palm Springs, another desert shoot. And we shot this house early in the morning. We got up. This was another 2-day one, and the rain had come through the night before, and the architect Brett Woods had, much to his frustration, had to pay for the window cleaners to come out a second time. And so the first morning, the window cleaners were out cleaning the windows as we were looking at this extraordinary light and planning the shoot for the next morning.
Yeah.
And we were witnessing this incredible light, and that neither of us could barely sleep that night. We stayed at the project, and we were both feeling very tense about whether this event was going to repeat itself the next day. We felt pretty confident it was, because it was clear, and weather was bound to be clear. But it was so exciting and magical to get up really early in the morning. We got up before the sun came up, and there was this absolutely amazing light on the project. So moments like that, I think, are what I remember. Yeah.
Actually, Rick Joy is someone we should have on the show.
Yeah.
Oh, you should. Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
And you've had Anne Fougeron, I believe, right? So
yeah,
she's great.
Yeah, she's pretty. Her work is at the top of our list. I really love her work. As well as Rick Joy's and Woods Dangaron, for sure.
I just went to scout yesterday. I scouted a new Anne Fougeron project, which is a house that sits over a waterfall, and it's amazing. It's amazing. It's amazing in so many ways. Yeah.
Oh, I'm
really excited about that.
I'm looking forward to seeing that teaser. Yeah, her stuff is just, I mean, she as a person is just a lot of fun to be around, and she's incredibly sharp. But her work has just a lot of fun and personality to it. It's not bashful. It's very her,
Yeah, and I think she'll be okay with me saying that it's very French. She brings that to it.
Yeah.
It's American, but it's also something different.
Yeah.
And I think it's French.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, she seems very French in many ways.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which...
Yeah.
which I like. She's a tough woman too, which I really like.
She's got a wonderful combination of being East Coast and French. And it's just my favorite. This is embarrassing, but I'll share it with you. One of my favorite moments with Anne is I was on many years ago when I was starting to shoot for her, and I arrived at the Scout, and for some reason I'd been in a terrible rush that morning, and we were standing next to each other looking out from this incredible glass that she'd created on the back of this house in San Francisco. And I reached down, there's something bugging me on my jeans, and I reached down and I pulled out a dirty sock.
I wasn't expecting that.
And I was just holding this dirty sock, thoroughly embarrassed. And all she said was, "Yep, that'll happen." That was it.
That's great. That'll happen.
You should cherish that sock. That's a very specific sock.
That's
She's very sweet at making me feel okay about it. Yeah.
Yep, that'll happen. That's just brilliant.
But yeah, it's interesting because a lot of architects we interviewed, I think, have worked with you.
Probably. Well, yeah.
And I think the role that architecture photography plays into an architect's career is very important, right? Because those are the images that the world is going to see of the work that we're doing, and you have the power basically in your hands to make the career of someone in a way, which is very fascinating to me.
Well, if you put it that way, that's an extreme amount of pressure on an individual.
No, but I mean, I don't know. No, but because the picture could become famous, or an emerging talent who was just doing the work in their little local town is now revealed to the world. So there is very interesting.
I mean, a great building is a great building, and people are going to discover it. I think to facilitate that discovery is a great joy. There's the joy of taking pictures, and there's the joy of the photography, and the joy of experiencing the architecture. But then for me is the joy of working with other creatives, and then feeling kind of part of their team as such, and seeing the fruit of their labors seen by the world. That's that's a lovely feeling. It's lovely when something gets published and they're really excited about it.
For
and
sure.
It means something, and to see books being made and to be contributing to that, it's great. Yeah, I really enjoy that part of it.
Would you be curious to go and shoot a project, I don't know, let's say like years later, but kind of, like looking at it again with different eyes after different layers of time have passed through?
I'm always suggesting that to my clients.
Really?
Yeah. And it's difficult because, where's the budget to reshoot something?
Right.
But coming back to that idea of Cliff May and experiencing what the Cliff May buildings looked like once everything had grown in. Landscape architects often want to go back, and one of the landscape architects that I often worked with on projects is Bernard Traynor. He's a local landscape architect, and his work is absolutely brilliant, very understated. You end up going to a project and just thinking, oh, this is in a lovely place, which is, it comes back to that thing of like, the really hard work is the work that people don't see.
Yeah.
You don't realize that Bernard has very carefully situated this project in with the landscape by creating an unbelievable transition. Bernard always wants to go back to a project years later and shoot, because that's when his intentions are fully realized. I think architects would benefit greatly from going back and shooting stuff. I think architecture would too. I mean, in the sense that I don't think everything that is published is shot straight after it's made.
Yeah.
And so in a way, there's a disservice to architecture and to architects who are thinking about what it means to age, what it means to patina. And so many projects have those things in mind, and we rarely see them. We rarely see what happened. Amangiri is a great example, actually. When I went back to shoot last year, I went back to shoot their new Camp Sarica, this new section that they've done. And then I was given a couple of days just to shoot the original hotel and some of the things. Well, I-10 Architects had put in place all these different water features that would drip and corrode and create things that would happen over time. And they've really happened since I was there.
Oh, cool.
However many years before. I can't remember. Like I say, I'm terrible with dates. But I'm working on your website. I'll send you guys those pictures if you're interested.
Yes.
Because to see the patina that's occurred on that, to see it realized is fascinating, and we so rarely get to see that in architectural publications, unless you're talking, someone's gone back to something, and usually it's an already established architect. But yeah,
it's an interesting topic you're bringing about, basically showing that buildings age, and it's okay. I mean, we all age, everything age, and it's probably not something we should be afraid of showing. And I feel like, talking in parallel to fashion, I feel like we start seeing that in fashion, where we show people with wrinkles, bodies that are imperfect, right? So maybe at some point architecture is going to get to that point too, where, we just show it a few years later after it's been occupied and the wood has weathered and things have patined, and, it's actually in its true form, in a way.
I think that it's difficult. The challenge is that, you've had a budget to shoot something, you've shot it as you have to generate more work. As soon as you've done it, you want to show off what you've been working on as soon as you can. You want to generate more work from it. So then to come up with a budget to then go back and shoot something is tricky. So maybe it's more, an opportunity for publishers and books to do that.
Yeah.
And push that, and someone to write a book about patina would be a wonderful thing. And to go back and shoot things just looking for that would be great. Yeah.
I mean, I'm imagining now a book that would show, photographs of when a project was done, like day zero versus, I don't know, 3-5 years later. And you just had side-by-sides throughout the entire book would be really, really interesting.
Yeah.
And it might actually kind of... that thought might be a little bit frightful to some architects, because they generally architects seek after the perfection, and also some architects, there's some gamble involved when we talk about a timeline like that. We don't know, especially if you're pushing the boundaries of design and fabrication. This is a bit of an experiment. We'll see. I'd say how this holds up or how things get used and whatnot. But nevertheless, it would be fascinating to see.
Unfortunately, and the challenge for architects is that you can create what you create, and then you're kind of the custodian of that. It's up to them, and different projects need to be cared for in different ways, and they may or may not be. But I think that to think about how architecture will age, what it means in a few years' time, in many years' time, architects think about. But I think to really make a book about it would be great, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it'd be really cool.
Yeah.
We just need a sponsor. If anyone out there has a bunch of cash, and they want to hire Joe Fletcher to do this, please,
that's right.
By all means.
You want me to send me around the world taking pictures of crumbling architecture? I'm your man.
Yeah, perfect.
Great.
Specific question, going back to kind of the process and finishing that part. So after the shoot itself, how long does it take you to do post-production?
Far too long. I'd say for every day I shoot, it's 2 days in post. The reality of it, I will do a rough draft and send that to the client and let them choose which ones they want. You know, like I say, I hope we always come away with a kind of more images, you know, abundance of riches, more images than we need, and we can distill it down to a really strong set. A great shoot means that that's a difficult decision, so that's a great place to be. And then once those are chosen, then I'll then refine those and do a little bit of Photoshop work. I really try to do as little as possible in terms of manipulating the image, but just really refining the colors, etc. Is surprisingly time consuming, even, you know, as I feel I'm getting better at it. And I don't like to hand it off to other people. It's such a huge part of what makes an image. And I feel like I'm learning all the time, you know, and the software is changing all the time and offering different ways to think about color and etc. So I stick to doing it myself, and it's very time consuming, but I also enjoy it. Yeah.
What's next for you?
Let's see.
New website?
There's the amp. Got to finish the website. Thank you for reminding me. That was my COVID project. You'd think that would have given me enough time.
Well, fortunately, it's still lingering,
COVID, so
your deadline has been extended.
Maybe Omicron version 2 will let me finish my website. Sorry, that's too dark. But yeah, I've got lots of great projects lined up. Yeah, I'm really excited about. Thomas Ryan is a young architect who did a house out in Charlottesville that I shot with him, and his work is fantastic. He's got a fascinating looking house in Montana that I can't wait to shoot. Woods and Dangren are busy working on their monograph. I don't think that will be out for a year. They're doing that with Rizzoli, and I've done all the photography for that, so I'm really excited about that.
Very cool.
Yeah, the shoot with Anne Fougeron is coming up. There's lots of things that I get hints of and get very excited. OPA Architects in San Francisco have got this. They do absolutely amazingly. I don't know if you know their work, but their work is so. Talking of, you know, people taking risks and doing contemporary work, they're the epiphany of that. So they've got this project which hopefully be shooting relatively soon, which is very exciting. Yeah.
So how many days out of a month are you shooting?
Well, I try to space it out, but it's, you know, it's life. It never does that. So things always end up being compressed into me shooting a whole bunch and then furiously working on the computer to not let my clients get too mad with me about how long it's taking to produce stuff. Yeah. So, you know, I think a kind of average of like a shoot a week, maybe.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Okay. 2 shoots a week.
Yeah.
Right.
Is what I try to do. You know, a shoot day in reality is exhausting.
Yeah.
I would imagine.
It takes a lot of concentration. It's a long day on any day of the year. It's you know, I don't think I could do a lot more than 2 days of shooting a week.
The final question from me, well, I guess there's 2. Oh, I've lost the first one. Shoot.
Okay, so
okay. Well,
one.
I'll ask you the question which we ask all the architects, but you might have an answer as well, which is, do you have a favorite building, and if so, what is it?
Easy question.
You can't ask people that.
That's what I said.
It's like asking, what's your favorite color?
Yeah.
No is the answer.
Okay. I made the mistake. Usually I just ask, what's your favorite building, forcing the answer. That's legitimate. It's no.
I love it.
If you're watching this on YouTube, thanks for watching. Please subscribe to the show by hitting that subscribe button and like this episode and leave comments and whatever else you do on YouTube. You can also find us on iTunes and Spotify if you don't feel like looking at our faces. Right?
In your face.
Yeah.
When you look at my face, you could stay on YouTube.
So thanks for listening or watching, and we'll talk to you again next week.